Hello class, obviously I'm not here today, so what we will be learning about is the Declaration of Independence, and I prepared this movie to go along with the notes so that you don't really miss a beat and we stay on schedule. If any time you need the substitute teacher or Mr. Jerby to pause the movie, just ask nicely. Hopefully they can do that for you, and we'll get rolling. Today we're just going to lay out some of the basic facts about the Declaration of Independence. The way I have always considered the Declaration of Independence is as the breakup letter between the United States colonies and England. In this document, we will explain to England why we no longer want to be working with them and the way we felt we should have been treated as a colony, and we list all of these complaints about England. So it's really our letter breaking up with England. The Declaration of Independence is not a government. It does not have any sort of laws or rules. It's just a list of some really good ideas that will affect our country greatly, but really the point is to break up with England and also to explain to the citizens of the United States colonies why the founding fathers felt that it was important for us to go through this process. Now, there was actually a committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence, but the number one author is Thomas Jefferson. He had support from this committee, and there are other people who influenced it, such as Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. But the guy who really came up with this idea was Thomas Jefferson. And he wrote it as part of the Second Continental Congress, which met in Philadelphia, and at a place that we now call Independence Hall because of the signing of this document in that place in Philadelphia. But they were really called, the Second Continental Congress was called to discuss exactly what should be done with England, and after disputing for a while, this is the group that finally decides we must separate from England. And that was really a controversial issue. In 1776, not every single person was convinced that breaking away from England was really the answer to all the colonies' problems. In fact, a lot of people were very fearful of war. New York, for example, abstained from the vote because the British Navy was sitting outside of New York Harbor, and they were sure that if they declared their independence, then they would be destroyed by the British Navy. So this was a very controversial thing that was discussed, but eventually the Continental Congress does decide on separating itself from England. So the letter is directed towards England, and specifically it mentions a he. For about the last 2/3 of the document, it's this huge list of complaints, and it says he has quartered troops and he has raised taxes without representation. And the he they are referring to is King George III, of course. So King George III of England is specifically referenced in this document. Okay, what I want to take a second to do is look at the actual first section of the Declaration of Independence and put this into language that everyone can understand. Thomas Jefferson was a very good writer. He was also a genius. And so he uses words that maybe we as a people would not necessarily today fully understand. So I have this idea from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident means kind of obvious or everyone knows this. So like it's almost like common sense, it's self-evident. If I walked into class and I was blowing my nose and I was coughing and I was sneezing, you might say it is self-evident that Mr. Bear is not feeling well today. Just by looking at it, anybody can tell Mr. Bear is not feeling well. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. We believe it is obvious that all men are created equal. Very simply, no one person is better than another. Now, there are a couple things about this that in context we should recognize. It does say men. At this point, they're not necessarily discussing women's rights, and they're not saying all people are created equal. So there is no mention of women at that time. Also, you must consider that although they had said all men are created equal, this is also a time where half the country practiced slavery and imprisoned other people. So they'll just kind of conveniently forget about that in the Declaration of Independence. But this is their statement of belief, and it's still a solid idea that all men are created equal, no person is better than another, and that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights. Endowed as a word means you're born with. You could say that baby was endowed with blue eyes, or he was endowed with a good sense of fashion. Sure, you could be born with something like that. And the Founding Fathers say that we believe you are born with inalienable rights. Inalienable means that they cannot be removed. You can't take those rights away. No one can deny them to you. They're just inherent in being a human. They're just something you are endowed with, you are born with. And these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To live your life, to make your own choices, and to do the things that make you happy. Okay? Where did he borrow these ideas from? This idea of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Where did Thomas Jefferson get these ideas? Mark, do you know? Okay. Hopefully he said from John Locke, who we talked about last time. John Locke was the guy that said he believed everybody was born with the natural rights, and he identified those rights as life, liberty, and what, Ian? Property. Good job. Okay, so yes, these ideas of natural rights are borrowed from John Locke, which is this dude. And John Locke originally said that the human rights you're born with are life, liberty, and property. And Thomas Jefferson would borrow these ideas of John Locke's natural rights and social contract. And, these ideas will become very essential to the Declaration of Independence and later will go on to form the basis of our government. But both identify their being as natural rights every person is born with. And of course, Jefferson said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and Locke said property, but they're the same general ideas. It's not to say Locke didn't, or Jefferson did not believe in property rights. It's just, he kind of edited it a little bit. So, yes. Oh, the way you can remember that, this guy, his name is Locke, and the way you think of it is you think of like a padlock, and you use a padlock to lock up your territory, lock up your property with a lock, So you can remember Locke as the property guy because he's the one who locks up your property. Make sense? And I don't know what you can think of for Jefferson. I guess we can think of him as a happy guy. Ooh, he's smiling. I don't know, maybe. Okay, then the Declaration of Independence goes on to list all these grievances. And a grievance simply is a complaint. and they spend a lot of time in the Declaration of Independence making complaints. The first being of one of the major ones being of quartering. Quartering is putting soldiers in people's houses. And just imagine how annoying that would be to have some young 18-year-old soldier knock on your house and you being required to give up one of your rooms to the house. It's just a massive invasion in people's private lives. And so, this was something that they viewed as totally wrong in the Revolutionary War, and something that they will complain about in the Declaration of Independence and guarantee not to do in our own Constitution. It seems weird to us that the Third Amendment to the Constitution is no quartering of troops, because it seems like such a strange concept to us today. But it just goes to show how angry the colonists were about this quartering thing. Also, they say he failed to make laws necessary for the public good, meaning he wasn't making laws that the colonies needed. They didn't really think he was representing their views, and he wasn't taking the right sort of actions to help the colonies out. Another big complaint, obviously, was the no taxation without representation. There was a parliament in England, which was a representative body. It would later evolve into a total democracy like it is today, an indirect democracy like the United States. But there was parliament in England, but the colonies were not given representatives. And this is pretty much because King George III wanted the colonies to be his personal little playground where he could still rule like an old school king, where he could just dictate whatever he wanted like he could before the Magna Carta. So, this idea that there was a parliament, the colonies are not being given any sort of say in this. Also, if you wanted to complain to Parliament, you had to cross the ocean. And in 1700s, this would take you a while. This could take like 3 months to travel across the Atlantic Ocean. So anytime you want to make a statement to your government, it would take 3 months to get to England. It would take 3 months to get back. Think about it. If you want to pass a new law, you're going to leave now. You're going to get there just before Christmas. And by the time spring rolls around, you can come back and tell the colonies about your decision. It's kind of a very unpractical way to run your government. Also, they felt it was not fair because they had no trial by jury. All the judges were appointed by the king, and they saw that as a conflict of interest, because if they did anything that was against the king, then they knew the judges were going to rule in their favor. For example, in the Boston Massacre, all the soldiers were put on trial, and they were found not guilty of committing a crime for shooting the unarmed citizens of Boston, and they think that there was a trial of Bostonians that were on that jury, or a jury of Bostonians that were in that trial, then it probably wouldn't have turned out that way. Okay, finally, the Declaration of Independence states that the colonies have tried to avoid separation, although this obviously was not possible. They say, we've tried everything, we've sent petitions asking you to change these things, and the king has refused them. So basically they say, we tried to stop it, but it happened anyway. And then the final statement in the Declaration of Independence is that they state that they have risked their life, or they stake their life, fortune, and sacred honor on this, meaning that they are risking everything. Not only could they be killed for signing these documents, but they're also risking everything they own. Their property could be taken, and even their reputation was at stake, which to us may seem kind of trivial, but back then, reputation was taken very seriously. So basically, the Founding Fathers were risking everything on their Declaration of Independence. All right, a kind of final word about the history of the Declaration of Independence. Kind of famous is John Hancock's signature. In fact, it's even become, part of our language. When somebody wants you to sign something, they'll say, put your John Hancock on here. And there's kind of this cute story that goes on that says that, John Hancock signed his name big and bold so that the King George could read this document without putting on his eyeglasses. And that's kind of a cute story that school teachers like to tell children. But the truth was John Hancock was the president of the Second Continental Congress. And as a result, he was kind of expected. It was customary for the leader of such a gathering to put his name in such big letters. So a leader of a group, when they signed a document, was supposed to put their name in the middle and the largest. Maybe the exact reason why it's so big is because of this, but one would expect John Hancock's signature to stick out because he was the president of the Second Continental Congress. Now, we recognize, the official signing as the 4th of July. That's where John Hancock put his signature. That's what we recognize as Independence Day. But the truth of the matter was, after the group decided on independence, it actually took a while to get the document completed, as well as making all these copies of it. And so it wasn't actually till a while later that all these signatures were being added. In fact, they say some signatures were added all the way up to August 2nd. So while the 4th of July is the day of Independence Day, and that is the day that you'll need to know, just know that there wasn't this one big incident where everybody signed it all at once. Okay? Some other things you should know, that there were several drafts, several different copies of the Declaration made. One version had talked about the slave trade, which I can't spell. Version, excuse me a second. One version mentioned the slave trade, but they didn't really want to offend their Southern brothers who had slavery, so Jefferson was convinced to take this mention of the slave trade out. And so if you look in your book at the copy of the Declaration of Independence, you'll see that there are parts crossed out and revised, and it actually went through several drafts. There's also a number of copies called the Dunlap broadsides, which were huge sheet-sized versions of the Declaration of Independence that they printed, and they posted all around the colony so that people could come up and read exactly why they were breaking away from England. While this letter is kind of the breakup letter to King George, it's also meant to explain to the public why they're engaged in this war and why they felt that this war was very serious. Now, the Declaration of Independence was just a document. It was just the letter that was written. The actual idea to break away was presented by Henry Lighthorse Lee from Virginia. He is the one who finally made the statement that they should break away and become independent. And so when the Continental Congress is really debating about independence or not, they're really debating the Lee Resolution. The Declaration of Independence is just a result of the Lee Resolution, but obviously we identify the Declaration of Independence as being more important than this actual just statement. Now you'll see I've kind of put an example here. There are all sorts of famous paintings of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Here you got Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and John Adams and all these guys, and they're kind of presenting it before the Congress. And this is supposed to indicate the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And this image even appears on a $2 bill, this exact same image. But these paintings are a load of hooey. They're really inaccurate because, like I said, the 4th of July, was when John Hancock put his name to it, and Thomas Jefferson and a couple other people put their names on it on July 4th, but this never happened. There was not one big presentation because a lot of the Congress had to return back and put their name and get ready for war, and they came back and put their name on it at a later date, all the way up to August 2nd. So these pictures are cool. They show up in a lot of textbooks, and they show up in civics books, and they show up on the $2 bill, but really there was not one huge signing of the Declaration of Independence like this. That's all kind of made up. Okay, following the Declaration of Independence, we had to establish our own government, and this was known as the Articles of Confederation. And it lasted for 10 years. And eventually we will abandon it because it is very weak. Okay. And next class, when we get into the Constitutional Convention, we'll mention some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. But to give you an example, in the Articles of Confederation, the United States government had no power to tax. There was no army of the United States. There was no president. So it was a very kind of weak and ineffective government. And we operate off that for a decade. Now, to say it's a confederate or a confederation means that they are a grouping of independent states. So under these articles, every state was pretty much on their own. They agreed to kind of work together for some mutual things, but there was not one government overseeing them all. They were all independent bodies, okay? In the United States, we do have 50 separate states that have their own governments, but above them exists a national or federal government. Under the Articles of Confederation, that didn't really happen. It was kind of like there were all these independent states, and then beneath the states was the national. And obviously, in our current model, the national government is viewed as more important than the individual state governments, but not in a confederacy. So this is the government we set up for 10 years. It got us to the Revolutionary War. Lasts us for a couple years after we win our independence, but eventually it will be abandoned for the Constitution. Now, there are two groups that come about after the Articles of Confederation, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the Federalists want us to have a strong central government. They think that, this idea of us being little independent states is not going to work, okay? Now, the Anti-Federalists say they're afraid of central government. And they kind of have a solid reason for this. A lot of Anti-Federalists would argue, we used to have a strong central government before. It was called King George. And they're afraid that it will create a new king. That if we make a government where someone is in charge of everything, one national government tells all the counties what to do, that it's going to be basically resort back to being a monarchy, we'll lose democracy, the states will lose their independence again. And so there's a lot of fight over abandoning these Articles of Confederation, and there's a lot of fight before we unite under one constitution. And the people who were opposed to it were the Anti-Federalists that did not want a constitution. The Federalists are for the Constitution, so maybe we could put that. The Federalists are pro-Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists are anti-Constitution. And eventually, what will happen is, in order to get the Anti-Federalists to ever agree to the Constitution, they must pass the Bill of Rights. So the Anti-Federalists require this as part of the Constitution. And what it really is, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. Sorry, my pen's acting a little funky here. But if you look really closely at the first 10 amendments, where it says things like there will be no quartering of troops, we have the right to free press and to free speech, the right to bear arms. Basically, all these things, these come from complaints in the Declaration of Independence. You know, everything we complained about that King George did, D of I is for Declaration of Independence. I just get tired of writing it like government. Everything that King George III did, we want to make sure that our new central government will not do. So the Anti-Federalists say that we will not approve of any sort of constitution whatsoever uniting into a central government without a Bill of Rights, basically a promise from the government saying that our essential rights are protected. Okay, so here are our review questions. The last thing I want to do here. So, what are the inalienable rights? Jeremiah? I'll give you a hint. It starts with life. Yep, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, John Locke said life, liberty, and what? Property. Right. So you remember that by thinking John Locke locked up your property. But those are your unalienable rights. Okay. Also, at the end of the Constitution, it says that the signers stake their life, fortune, and sacred honor. What does that mean, Sarah? Good. They're going to risk everything. They could die, they could lose all their money, and even their reputation. Now, we had a government after the Declaration, before the Constitution, and it was very weak. What was that government called, Ashlyn? Good. It was the Articles of Confederation. Very weak. All right, so class, who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Anybody? Just say it. Thomas Jefferson. Where did we write the Declaration? Okay, Philadelphia, but also remember Independence Hall. What day was it, too? That's not a question up here, but what day was it? 4th of July. Although the signatures are added later, you know, the easy version answer is 4th of July, 1776. Okay, who is he in the Declaration? He did this, he did that. Who's he? Good, King George III. And I forgot one. Hancock's signature. Why was that so large, Ian? No, not because of the eyeglasses thing. Why was it so large? Right, because he was the president of the Continental Congress, not because the king eyeglass story, even though, you know, 5th grade teachers around the world have taught that. Okay.